The Secret of the Church's Survival. That's the same book. And my latest book was A Guide to Happiness.
Oh, how beautiful.
So all 5 years are basically, I'm cooking in joy, you know, I'm pulling all these thoughts. So the secret of joy is to keep your mind on the positive, to keep your mind filled with joyful thoughts. And that's what the two books, Joyfully Living the Gospel Day by Day, is a daily meditation, uplifting thoughts. So each day you take a little seed of joy, you know. Today is going to be a blessed day for you because the Lord loves you and he wants to fill you with his joy.
Oh, that's beautiful.
You start out with a different thing than say, oh my God, it's raining out, you know. Abraham Lincoln said, some people look out the window to see how they're going to feel all day long. But what we should do is look to the wisdom of the church and of Christ's teaching.
That's so beautiful. And also, too, if anything I've learned over the years, that so much of it is incorporating it into our lives as a process. And as well-intentioned as I was, thinking that I would do retreats for the poor, I realized that basically it's one of the most threatening things that can happen to somebody who has lived in a ghetto area surrounded by bullets and shootings and just so many devastating things, that when they have complete quiet time, it's overwhelming to have to process a lifetime worth of grief and heartache.
How did you handle it?
Well, basically, I think, again, streaming from joy, humor, and people on the streets, particularly the homeless and people who have been disenfranchised, really have a terrific sense of humor. I guess life that does.
I guess you have to, yeah.
Yeah. But also, too, Father Catoir, you know, Father Jack, a question so many people are asking these days in light of the international events that have happened, particularly Haiti. And it's been, you know, people who are just on the borderline of a strong belief in God or a conversional experience use something like that to slip back and say, oh, well, you know, if there's a God, you know, the whole.
Why would God allow this to happen?
Yes. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, what I see, in addition to the natural catastrophe, is this incredible outpouring of love and support coming from all over the world. Yes, there was a disaster, but the miracle of love that has surrounded it, it makes me see God present more than the devastation, which was an earthquake. I remember a woman, a very fine woman. She was Jewish, and she had become an atheist because of the Holocaust. She was bitter. She lost people in the Holocaust, and her reaction to it was, what kind of a God would allow that? Either he's a bad God or he doesn't care. I don't want anything to do with God. Now, that's an understandable reaction. I don't know if she held to that, but it was logical and understandable. But we don't want to allow ourselves to slip into that kind of negativity.
Yes. And it's interesting, too, an eye-opener for me, a sort of an epiphany, was reading Eli Wiesel's book, Night.
Oh, yes.
And to realize what
he's the Jewish modern-day prophet who won the Nobel Peace Prize, yes.
Yes, and it's interesting because in Newark, after I left Patterson, I was in Newark in a house that actually a Jewish man permitted me to stay in for almost 2 years and to work in the neighborhood, never charged me rent. He just said, continue your work with the poor. And right next to the house on 14th Ave, right down by the old Ballantine Brewery in Newark, for anybody who's familiar with that area, was an old Jewish cemetery. And actually knowing the history of the Jewish people and basically going through that cemetery and trying to protect it and guard it, because the Jewish people have suffered so much. And, you know, the addicts, unfortunately, would use it as their playground. And my best point of logic to them was, would you want anyone desecrating your ancestors' graves? And so out of shame, they kind of slinked out of the cemetery, and I was able to maintain some decorum there and some sense of peace. But
that's a lovely story.
Yeah, you know, God is so merciful.
And I know for a fact that you ran into some hard times from priests. So the Jew was giving you free rent, and the priest was saying, you're crazy, we don't want any part.
You know, that's an interesting, I'm still in a quandary about that. I wonder about that because as lay people in the Catholic Church, which is very much led by the Spirit, I'm wondering if there's more, there could be more of a collaborative effort between laity and the hierarchy on serving the poor. And of course, the church has done many, many wonderful, wonderful things for the poor over the years.
Well,
But again, there's so much more. A lot of times the Holy Spirit will place a charism on a person's heart, and be they not a professed religious, they are still priests after the order of Melchizedek and are entitled to basically serve out their apostolate or their ministry.
follow their grace.
Yes. Yes.
Very simple
Yes.
and very true. And we have to make way for that, for the grace of God working through
And
individuals.
not let anything stop you if you
Yeah.
feel like you're being led by the Spirit.
And you will take a beating. You know, people say who covers your insurance, you know, and how are you going to, all of those.
You're a liability waiting to happen.
Yeah, you're a
I've
disaster.
heard that from more than one priest.
And everybody was afraid you're going to get hurt down there with these people, but they loved you.
Yeah, you know, basically, the addicts, so many people have said, were you ever attacked, or were you ever... No, you know, the people, once they feel that they can trust you and that you are sincere and basically reaching out to them, yeah, the only problems I had were with the politicians.
You know, as a
Not the
priest
addicts.
working at Eva's Village, some people I knew from my other life, so to speak, would say, why are you down there with these addicts? Somebody's going to hurt you, and it's dangerous, and you should be afraid. And I'll tell you, of all the jobs I've had in the priesthood, this is one where I was overwhelmed by gratitude, humility, and kindness from people who were tough street people. And another thing, I would give lectures to the addicts in the rehabilitation center, you know. So I would go give instructions on the 12-step program. So we'd have men and women. The only time they were brought together, we had about 90 men and about 40 women under our hotel, so to speak, for a year, for more. It just kept going. We had 4 graduations a year, and they would leave saying, Eva's gave me my life back, you know, that type of thing. But I would have the men and women together. Now, you got to realize that these women have been street women. To maintain their drugs, you know what they did. So they're all prostitutes, recovering addicts, I should say. And the men were street guys, and they were robbing gas stations, and so their whole life is a moral mess. But when they came together, instead of what would be the normal man-woman reaction, wisecracking and flirting and things like that, the men treated the women, I think, like they were their sisters. They wouldn't say Virginia, they would say Miss Virginia. There was a respect there.
Isn't it lovely when noble
And
surfaces?
right, and it clicked in. Because they realized they were all working on the same project, that is to get well. Yes. They didn't take it. Some of them fell in love, and we had to keep them apart. But
well, you know, jumping to another facet of your wonderful life that God has given you, and you've cooperated with His grace and lived it so much to the maximum.
Thanks be to God.
Yes, you know, now we're going from the street people to, I think that you've been with royalty. You have had people in Europe that so
well, I traveled with Cardinal Sunens for a year or two, and in his biography, or autobiography, he called me his occasional secretary. So he was the primate of Belgium. And he invited me to Belgium, and then invited me, wasn't aware of it, to meet King Baudouin. And King Baudouin was a wonderful Catholic man, and he happened to be the godfather, if you will, of all the royal families who were Catholic. And he died in the 90s, but he used to run a retreat or a day of recollection. So he asked me, would I come to Europe to give a retreat to his nephews and nieces?
What an experience.
So I could, you know, I only spoke English really with any fluency. And they all spoke perfect English, but they spoke 4 or 5 languages. But I remember I was there with